Well, let me welcome everybody to the Writers Track, as well as to the, I don't know how many times we've done this, but to the annual Fightin' and Writin' Writers Panel.
At least 12. At least 12. Oh my God. Because I've done it every single year since like the second year I was at DragonCon.
There you go, 12 plus. My name is John Robinson, and I'm actually the least accomplished person sitting at the table. So mainly, I will be throwing questions out and letting the actual experts here answer them. The way I'd like this to run is I'd like us to spend the first couple of minutes here for our panelists to introduce themselves, say what they do, if they have anything they want to pimp coming out here. Spend a few seconds doing that. Then I would like to go from then to about 11:15, going down the list of having each panelist answer a list of questions, which I passed out here earlier. From about 11:15 until we wrap up, then we'd like to throw this open to the audience, and the authors out in the audience can pass their questions along. So let's begin at the left. Go ahead.
Okay. Does this thing work? Yeah, I guess it is. I'm Mike Resnick. I've been doing this for 51 years now. Wow. And I have a...
Who doesn't know who Mike is wrong?
You applaud for doing it well, not just doing it. Anyway, I've got about 80 novels, about 20 collections, a bunch of anthologies. I'm currently editing Galaxy's Edge magazine too. I've done some screenplays, and I've won a bunch of Hugos, and I've lost a lot more than I've won.
Hello, I am AJ Scuderi. I have not been at this for 51 years. I'm
53?
like 60s. I thought I totally lost count about a decade ago. I can still count my novels on my hands. This many. And if I may pimp for a moment, this is a great crowd. If you're interested, and I'll shout out again at the end, over on the side, or you can come talk to me, we're offering an entire convention for writers who want to learn how to write fight scenes. So, yeah. Authors Combat Academy. Done. The big sign. With all the fighters across the top. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vanna.
No, I got it. Okay. Chris A. Jackson. I write for Paizo Publishing, Privateer Press. Soon to be writing for Catalyst and Shadowrun. Woohoo! Shadowrun. So a lot of tie-in stuff. Also writing for myself as well. I write a lot of nautical fiction, a lot of nautical battles. And I also have a Magical Assassin trilogy that has a lot of martial arts in it. So, been doing this for a while. I have about 13 novels to my credit, and more on the horizon. So.
Hi, I'm John Ringo, and you're not. For those of you who don't know me, I'm not going to be able to write for 53 years because I started in my 40s, unless somebody comes up with a magic pill. But I have 44 novels in hardcover. My most recent series starts with the book Under a Graveyard Sky, which is currently in paperback. It's also available as an ebook. It's even available as a, sorry, I have to say this in public, horrible audiobook. But that's my most recent series, 4 books. The third one has just come out, and the fourth one comes out in January. The first book is Under a Graveyard Sky, To Sail a Darkling Sea. The one that just came out is Islands of Rage and Hope, and the fourth one is Strands of Sorrow. It is generally called a zombie series. It's not really. And I'm probably going to use that primarily for the answers to the questions that we've been given, because it is a very good example of the questions that we've been given.
Okay, well, I'd like to just sort of zigzag back and forth and run the length of the table with the questions here. Again, first with you there, John. What does it best for you? The great big battle scenes with the armies clashing and the ships sinking and the big robots exploding and the planets blowing up, or the more close-in, intimate knife fights in back alleys and so forth? and how come?
Oh God Almighty, I have done so many of both. And if either one didn't work for me, I wouldn't do them. The thing to always remember in writing is not specifically what you're dealing with. Is it a big battle or is it a small intimate duel? It is the effect that it is having on the reader and the effect that it is having on the characters. If you have a great big battle that has absolutely no effect on any of the characters in the story that your readers have become attached to, then it is an absolutely pointless battle and you might as well not even have written it in. On the other hand, if there is, kind of you get this, there has to be an effect upon the readers or upon the characters that your reader has identified with. So the first thing that you have to do is get your readers to identify with the characters, and then always have a fight scene or a death which is an effect upon the reader. That's the important part. But I've thrown, as they put it, a Weber of missiles. Yes, David Weber is very proud of the fact that he has now become a unit of measure. I have thrown a Weber of missiles in battle, but the important thing about the Weber of missiles was the effect that it had upon the characters that the readers have identified with. I have had people fighting, one-on-one to the point of, coming down to having to strangle each other to death, quite literally. But the important point is that it's two people in that if it's a big battle, there have to be two people the readers have identified with who are clashing, or two groups that the readers comprehend that are clashing, and there has to be something really to draw the reader to that moment. That's all. Doesn't matter if it's big, doesn't matter if it's small. That's all.
Okay. I can't really cap that too much. I've done both. I find small intimate fights a lot, I don't want to say easier, but there's a lot less going on. There's a lot more things to consider in a battle. There's ground, there's weather, there's which side had breakfast to consider. And it's a lot easier also if you're in an intimate fight to get that visceral feeling. As John said, it's important to make it visceral. It's important to make the impact. That's key. And sometimes in a battle, battles from a soldier's point of view or from the people's point of view who are in the battle are confusing things. A new recruit in a battle is completely confused, whereas somebody who's been in several battles might be less confused. Somebody who did that beautifully was Elizabeth Moon, as she developed her Parksenarian character. In the initial battles, she didn't have any idea what was going on, and she was terrified. And as she developed that character into a mercenary soldier, she understood what was going on, and she became more cognizant of what was happening around her, and it was less confusing, and it was more directed, and she became a more effective soldier because of that. And the thing to remember in a non-gunpowder battle is every fight is in your face, and you don't really see, unless there's archers involved, and you're under your shield, of course, but every fight that you are fighting is in your face, and more often than not, it's more than one fight at a time. So things get very, very confusing in a fight, whether they're in a battle situation. If it's just two guys fighting, or a guy and a girl fighting, or two girls fighting, that is something that you can choreograph, move per move. Big battles are a lot more confusing. So I do both. I think intimate fights are a lot more straightforward.
Do you mind if I jump back in real quick?
The big complexity to writing a big battle is that you have to change levels. Okay, it's very important when you're writing a big battle to change levels. You have to see it from the admiral or general's perspective. You have to see it from the colonel's perspective. And you definitely always have to have the character who's on the front lines, who is having his or her buddies dying around them, so that you have that, you have all those levels. And that is one of the things that makes writing a battle much more complex.
I would tag on to that and say, I have been writing more intimate, though I love reading both, as always, when it's well done. But when you look at that intimate hand-to-hand fight, you want to consider a couple of other things too. Like we were saying, is it two people in a dark alley and no one else is around? Or are you looking at an intimate hand-to-hand battle in the midst of a bigger melee? And I think the thing to consider too, as you were saying, you need to look at different levels. What have you established in the writing and what are you working with? So I know the way that I write, I tend to stick to a strict point of view. And given that the writing lends itself to that hand-to-hand, whether it's occurring in a larger battle or not. And in many cases, the characters will walk out of their fight and have to do what humans have to do and find out what happened. Did we win? And so I think that's a situation too. And I think it's what do you bring to it? I mean, you guys are fighters? Yeah? Yeah?
Well,
Not
not
today.
actually physically all the time, but yeah.
But that's fair. I'm a dancer.
Yeah, okay. I needed your help in a book that I was writing not too long ago.
And, well, but, you know, when I'm writing a fight scene, I work with fighters and I get them to mock it out, but I also have that choreography sense of what goes where and who sees what and what it looks like from each angle. And so I think the issue is you don't have to be a fighter. I have fighters come up to me and say, well, obviously you're a fighter. And I go, I can hit a beautiful fifth position. But you don't have to be to write a good fight scene. But you do have to think about that angle, what's the point of view, and do your research.
Okay, well, first we have to correct the serious misapprehension of Mr. Ringo. Because Jack Williamson dedicated the book to me when he was 98. So don't you let him cop out and write less than 50 years.
Okay, John. Okay, John.
So there's hope for the Dragon series after all.
All right. I've written very few large epic battle scenes, partially because I've never been involved in one, but mostly because I feel as a reader and a writer that it's nice if you can make the reader think. We're writing science fiction. When I grew up, there were big arguments in this field about whether it was a literature of ideas or not. It's my feeling that it's like every other literature, you've got to make the reader care. If you make him care and think, so much the better, and you've written a better story. But if he doesn't care, then all you've done is written polemic or a technological crossword puzzle. And I find it easier to make him care when I can narrow down the participants. There are also a number of other things. For example, is this war very important? It seems very important, everybody's in it. But in my lifetime, I was born during the last few years of World War II, and it changed the world. And about 4 years later, we had the Korean War, which seemed at the time every bit as important, but it changed nothing. And then we had the Vietnamese War, which didn't change the world of politics, but it sure changed the American social and political scene. So you have to determine exactly what your war is likely to change, not what it's being fought to change, but what it's most likely to change. And to do that, it keeps coming back to telling it on a personal level. I don't really care about watching 5,000 ships shoot things at each other. I'm more interested in knowing why they're shooting at each other. Lester Del Rey, who most of you have at least heard of, used to brag that every time he had a faster-than-light ship, he explained in the literature how it went faster than light. And I always used to argue and say, I don't care how it goes faster. I want to know where it's going and what it's going to find when it gets there. And I have that same kind of attitude about battles or anything else I write about, which is probably why I'm an imposter on this panel, but I got to answer your question. All right.
Okay,
Hey, I
well,
just did a Helix panel, and I've never seen the TV show, so, you know, you're good.
well, while we've got you, it's got its own track here at DragonCon, so you know it's made it. What suggestions do you have for incorporating violence into work meant to be read by youngsters? And suppose it's youngsters actually committing the violence. Do you have any hints there?
Well, we got a problem here. Most of the youngsters today know an awful lot more swear words than I do. No, seriously, I had never done a young adult novel, and then a few years ago, my agent got me an assignment. I did 3 of them in about a year, and my editor kept saying, come on, they're not 8 years old. You know, he can grab her, he can hit her, she can kick him in the balls, they can go to bed. And I said, they're 14. Well, we didn't do it when I was 14, but evidently the world has changed when I haven't been looking. So what suggestions do I have for incorporating violence into a work for youngsters? Well, if it's a work for youngsters, I would probably try and keep it somewhat short of murder. And in retrospect, I really don't know why, because if you turn on the news every night, you know, who's killing who. But I have done so little young adult work, I would be very leery of putting anything that, as a young man or a teenager, I would have thought too strong. And I think in this day and age, that would be a mistake.
Also not a YA author. But I think if we look historically, there's always been violence in YA work, even when it wasn't YA. You go back to The Outsiders, you go back to Lord of the Flies. You know, The Hunger Games is nothing new, violence-wise. And so, I think you get into more of the questions we ask ourselves today when we do watch the news. And there are people out there who will tell you that violence isn't worse today. We just have news spreading it around and putting it in our faces for, you know, repeatedly. Lizzie Borden, you know, how many bodies weren't found simply because the neighbors, you know, were 5 miles away. So I, for one, believe that it probably existed all along. I have no idea if the overall level is truly worse. But I think it's the same question you ask yourself as an adult author.
Statistically, the answer is the level is significantly lower.
I believe it.
Significantly,
like if you look, well, if you look at like murder over
1500s.
long history, yeah, that's drastically decreased. Although I don't know what other violence, like if other violence is coming up to kind of take its place.
Nope.
But as an adult author, what if somebody goes out and does what you've written? How do you feel about that? And I think that's a question you have to ask yourself. Yeah. It's the same question the Winchester family has to ask themselves. They make guns. What if people shoot their guns? It's going to happen. And so.
And a lot of the Winchesters went absolutely stark raving crazy
And they
because
did,
of it. Yeah.
because absolutely, Winchester House is a testament
It's an
to
interesting place.
it. Very
Well,
much is, and she was nuts. But I don't know that that's different in YA. Maybe it is because you feel your audience is more impressionable and you have more of a responsibility. But I don't know. I don't know that any one of us can answer it. Obviously, some of us are like, throw it in there. I mean, catch Hunger Games.
Well, I'd like to disagree with one assumption, which is that we're responsible because somebody reads something we've done. You know, they caught Charlie Manson with a Heinlein book in his pocket. I don't blame Heinlein for what Charlie Manson did.
I'm just saying you could feel responsible, though, if somebody did it. Not that you are, but would you?
No, I couldn't.
Awesome.
I absolutely would not. I would refuse to feel responsible for some. If somebody's going to do something like that, they will find something else to key on to make them do it. But as far as violence and other things for that matter for the YA audience, the thing is, YA is young adult, right? It's not kids. It's young adult. So we have to deal with adult issues, violence and sex, right? Now, interestingly enough, I've been told several times that my books could, oh, you should have marketed that as YA. Well, I don't want to narrow my audience, right? YA is not a genre, it's a marketing category, right? So I don't narrow my audience, and I put something in there for everyone. And do I pull punches? It depends on the publisher. It's what they want from me. If they want to draw the drapes right before the sex scene starts, that's where I draw the drapes. If they want violent eviscerations, they get violent eviscerations. The piece I just, actually for the first time ever, I had a little bit of violence I had to pull back on. And that was in the piece I did for Privateer Press. It was an amputation. You know, circa, which would equivalent to a circa 1900s naval emergency amputation of a leg. And they wanted me to pull back on the way I did it. And fine, if that's what you want, that's what you get. So, would I pull back? No. If the publisher feels like they want me to pull back, I'll draw the drapes when you want me to pull back. But there's a quote by George Carlin that I would rather have my kid watch two people making love than have them watch one person killing another. So.
I was going to say, I've always believed that we make a mistake believing that because children's world is smaller, it's kinder. And so,
Yeah.
writing to that level
Does anybody
acknowledges
remember being a
what they
kid?
live.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
what was that?
Does anybody remember being a kid?
Exactly. And if you don't write to that, if you don't give them that, you're not writing to your audience.
Now, I'd also like to make one other comment. We're talking about, you know, young adult and sex and violence. Sex and violence are the catalyst, but the important thing are consequences. And if you don't give those, you've written a pretty lousy story no matter who you're aiming it at.
Yeah.
Mike and I disagree on all sorts of stuff, so I'm just not going to deal with, I'm not going to say anything about any of my disagreements on Mike. But one of the, you know, you said, what are the consequences?
Yeah.
Okay. And it actually leads into where I wanted to start, which is that Genghis Khan participated in his first battle and committed his first rape at the age of 15. Okay. So, perfect YA member of, I mean, he's the audience, okay? So, from the point of view of violence, you were talking about it, I don't know if violence is, there's more violence now, if there's more death. No, statistically, if you go back, it depends on what particular period of certain centuries, but the highest death rate that we've had worldwide during the 20th century was World War II, and we had a 3% death rate worldwide, which is horrific. If you go back and you study forensic anthropology and you study how people died as hunter-gatherers, depending on which study you choose, the death rate was between 10 and 20% from violence. Okay, that's how violent the world used to be. And the death rate, the primary death rate, the period in which the majority died was in the first 2 years of life and between the ages of 12 and 17. Women died from childbirth between 12 and 17. Men died from violence between 12 and 17. Flat out. Those were the peak periods, and those were the two primary death forms. World used to be a horribly violent place. The world is so peaceful and so nice and so wonderful these days that basically we can't even wrap our human brains around it, just how great it is. So violence, historically, the way that we evolved, the way that we formed, fell primarily on the young. And the young are still a very, very violent category. Anybody got kids in high school? Or anybody just get out of high school? Whether they're allowed to get away with violence or not, they're very violent. And, it's a violent environment. So YA, do all the violence you want, okay? Because the kids are already familiar with it. They're tweaked up to it, absolutely. The second question was, suppose it's youngsters actually committing the violence. And here, the reason that I want to talk about Graveyard Sky, I've got to do a little background, sorry for everybody else on the panel. There's a plague which is spread, which basically drives everybody insane. See also Helix, see also World War Z, see also blah, 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 blah. and a family of preppers, father's Australian, they're from the United States. He emigrated to the United States. He's a history teacher in Virginia, and he's got 2 daughters, 15 and 13, Sophia and Faith. Sophia is the dutiful, get things done, etc., etc., etc. She eventually becomes a boat captain after they take to sea. Faith is at one point described by the Special Forces sergeant that she's working with as a psycho-anime zombie killer chick come to life. She's 13 years old, and she lives for killing zombies. She lives for killing infected, but the infected are nothing more than plague-ridden, insane people, okay? She comes into this room, and all of you that were naked and acting insane, she just shoots you, okay? She's a sociopath. She's arguably, in this environment, a psychopath. But she had been a perfectly normal kid beforehand. She had all of these latent capabilities. She would have been okay. She would have gone to college. She might have been a vet. She might have been she would have gotten married. You drop her into that environment, and she is the round peg in the round hole. That was the environment she was made for. The other question was, well, I suppose, but it doesn't mean that she's not having psychological effects for this. She can handle killing the infected. She does not have a single problem with that. She mostly bitches about the fact that M16s 5.56 don't do the job very well. About half of the book is Faith bitching about 5.56. Okay, and it's not because I particularly care. It's because Faith is that kind of obsessive person that bitches about the rounds. But she can't shoot the children. They're infected, they're violent, they're dangerous, but if it's little kids, she just can't do it. The other thing is, at one point, they often deal with survivors who are on death's door because they're out of food, they're out of water, they're dying. They end up clearing a cruise liner, the second largest cruise liner in the world. There's 4 of them, one of whom is Faith. She's a 13-year-old girl. She's big for her age. She's very athletic. She's been training in guns her whole life in martial arts. She's prepared for it. But when they're clearing the passenger areas, they're opening up these doors, and there's families who have eaten each other. There's, there's people who have starved to death or dehydrated to death. It's like going into the death camps. And she has taken a teddy bear, and she carries a teddy bear with her. And at one point, they open up a stairwell, and she's ready to go in and kill zombies. And they open up the stairwell, and a decomposing body flops out. And it's got Bermuda shorts on and a Hawaiian shirt, and it's described that there are claw marks on the inside of the door because it was sealed. He couldn't get out. And she turns around, and then she reaches back and she pats the bed teddy bear, and she says, "Don't look, Trixie, it's not nicey." Yeah. So what she has done is she has taken her nice side and she's put it into the teddy bear. And finally she takes the teddy bear, and it's like, Faith, here's his dad standing there. And they wait a moment, they say, "Faith, we gotta go." She says, "Just give me some." And she says, "Okay, Trixie doesn't need to see this." And she puts Trixie into her ammo pack. She zips it closed so that Trixie doesn't have to deal with it. Then later, as they're clearing these rooms, she's working with a Marine, and she says, "I just can't do it. I can't go into another room." It's the second day that they're doing this, and she's like, "I can't do it." And Hooch, says, "I got it." And he goes into the next room, and he comes back out, and he goes, "It was empty. There's nobody in there." And she says, "Really?" And he says, "That's all Trixie needs to know." Okay, so, yeah. By the way, that's under a graveyard sky. Yeah, you can have the youngsters doing this, but one of the big things in writing, period, and Mike and I are going to agree on this, is that your characters should experience change. And violence changes people. So that's the most important thing. Sorry to have taken so long, but I wanted to really cover that YA question.
I'll tell you, let's roll.
Environment you end up with people under siege. And in the third book, I decided to actually do a little bit more description of what it was.
So one particular chapter actually takes place on St. Bart's. And it's a storeroom in a police station into which has been stuffed essentially a whole bunch of celebutants. And they were filming Celebrity Survivor St. Bart's. And so it's a lot of they're people that are minor B starlets, and there's a big boobed, really dumb, really sexual blonde, and it's one of those things that a lot of people kind of look at it and go, oh, John Ringo's going ghost again. Oh, John Ringo, no. And I was kind of looking at it, and it just was kind of funny for me. But one of the characters is based on Emma Watson, the Hermione in Harry Potter. Okay, in that book, the actress who played her. And it ended up being one of the best single chapters I have ever written. Because one of the problems is that everybody's infected, and then people will turn from the infection, and they'll just go from having a fever to all of a sudden they're going nuts, and you got to deal with it. And they end up having it's actually based on Snooki, it's Snoopy instead. Turns, and while they're trying to organize themselves in this room, and one of the characters is Paris Hilton, and she takes over. But they manage, and it's a very funny scene, and it's a horrific scene at the same time. They finally manage to subdue the infected without getting bitten and get her tied up. But then there's the question of, you've got this insane, violent, infected human being stuck in, it could be a room like this. We got enough supplies. Look, there's all these people. What the heck do we do? Okay, right here. Think about it for a moment. At any moment, people could start going insane and spreading the infection. What do you do? Well, they get her tied up, and then it's a question of, what do we do next? And so they kind of discuss that, and Paris is kind of leading them to the conclusion that they've got to kill her. Because there's nothing else to do. They can't keep her alive. They can't keep feeding her. They have that discussion. One of the other actresses, which is based on a particular Hollywood actress, is like, oh, you can't do that. That'd be terrible. And she's like, okay, you want the Snoopy puppy? You feed it. You figure out how to get it to go to the bathroom without it biting you. Okay. So they come to the conclusion, and it's like, well, somebody says, why don't you do it? And she says, I just can't bring myself to it. I know what has to be done, but I can't do it. And so after more discussion, the Emma Watson character walks over and strangles her. And it starts off with her being very caring, why are we getting special treatment? Why are we being taken care of? Why isn't everybody getting help? And yet she's the one that ends up doing what has to be done. And she ends up being the only one in the compartment each time that people turn that does what has to be done. And finally, the Paris Hilton, and I'm giving this away, spoilers, the Paris Hilton character, who has become her close friend, because Paris has, by force of personality, taken over the room and is organizing everything. She's had a fever, and she's worried, and they're talking about it, and she turns. And the Emma Watson character has to strangle her friend. And afterwards, the Emma Watson character says, okay, Princess Juliana, you're in charge now. And one of the other actresses, who's been a bitch the whole time, says, well, why aren't you? She says, Brenda, I have one room in this compartment. Do not require my services. So, again, that one would be But yes, you always have to show the emotional toll. You always have to show the character change.
Fights and gunfights and spaceship fights I had seen on TV and seen in the comics and read in the books and so forth. And then my parents took me to see a Disney movie about a little dog called Benji. Did anybody see that movie? In that movie, there is a scene where a person comes and very brutally kicks this small dog into a corner, and you see this image of this little raggedy dog cringing there, spattered with blood, and I think with a leg broken or something. And after seeing all that human violence, I was just like, "Whoo!" It was the first time I had the cold thing, the thing that goes down your neck and down your back. So let's get a little bit voyeuristic here, and sticking with fiction, which fictional act of violence riveted you the most, or the first, and what do you think it was that seized your eyeballs like that?
I need a little time to think about that one.
Yeah,
Let somebody else.
Oh.
I got it.
The end of Casino. I did not watch the whole of Casino. I caught it. It was on TV, and all that I caught was the explosion, and then Joe Pesci and his brother being beaten to death with baseball bats. And it was the scene of them being beaten to death by baseball bats. I went, you know what? It just was a little over the top for me, and I basically didn't watch Casino for a long time. If you watch the whole show, if you watch the whole movie, you get kind of inured. So when you get up to that scene, it's not that big of a scene, but I caught just that scene. And it was years before I felt like I was really bored and really looking for something to watch. And I went, well, okay, I'll watch the whole thing. And it was completely different watching the whole thing and all the violence in the Casino, and then you get to that scene. But that was the one that I can think of that really, really caught me, other than I just recently rewatched Band of Brothers and then watched The Pacific. If you have not watched Band of Brothers and you have not watched The Pacific, really, if you want some concept of what violence is like and the toll that it takes on people in reality, watch both of those. Because there's no, for writing reality, there's no better template for what violence does to people and what they become in the crucible of just constant violence. You were talking about their characters. If your character just didn't care, you would put that character off the side. You wouldn't care about it. Have you watched Band of Brothers?
No, I must admit I haven't.
Okay, watch Band of Brothers. Everyone's favorite character in Band of Brothers is Winters, okay, who is sort of the pseudo main character of the Band of Brothers all the way through. My second favorite character after Winters is Spears. And has anybody in here seen Band of Brothers? Okay, my second favorite character is Spears. And the reason that I like Spears is because he's a sociopath in the middle of just horrific violence, and he is the only person who is 100% dialed in and totally at home. He is in the horror of ETO and everything that they're going through. He's good. He's got not a single problem. As a matter of fact, his biggest problem is when the war ends and he doesn't get to fight anymore. And other than Winters, I liked Spears the most. And he's a guy that you start off by meeting him and he just kills 20 German prisoners. And yet he was the only person who was totally dialed in the whole time, and you knew it would never break because he's having fun. This is a vacation for him.
Go ahead.
I have mine. Sons of Anarchy. Spoiler. Opie. Because you have 5 years, and Opie is no better, no worse than any of them. But the way they played out the end of that character they're at an eye for an eye moment, and the sons are refusing to hand someone over, and Opie steps up. He knows he's going to die, and so in that last moment, and I don't know that Opie's death was any more violent than anyone else's, but you get this character arc that goes along flat and spikes right at the moment that he dies, and because of that, it was I've seen grown women with "Rest in Peace" Opie tattoos in his face, and I question sanity on that. I'm sorry, anyone who has that tattoo, but I can see why it struck that chord.
Boromir. And it really wasn't.
In the book, even better than the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really wasn't how. Well, okay, part of it was how he died, but it was the fact that he was redeemed and died, a hero. That's all I have to say about that.
If I were to take something that really moved me, probably the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, because I thought the Humphrey Bogart character was so admirable in the beginning and tried so hard to remain admirable and wound up such a shit. And wound up getting killed, and we didn't mind at all. We said, well, of course he's going to get killed. And I, being young and impressionable, I thought, well, if he could become like that, so could I. I'd better watch it.
I was thinking about it from the point of view of negative, by the way, the question,
what act of violence negatively, but now I would like to sort of revisit a completely different one. How many people here have ever read Roland and Oliver?
Have read which one?
Roland and Oliver, The Lay of Roland and Oliver. Okay, the Boromir scene is actually based on the death of Roland. And if you've never read The Lay of Roland and Oliver and you write high fantasy, you are so wrong. Okay, you really, really are.
You mean the Song of Roland, or is
Yeah.
it a different one? Okay.
Well, it's The Lay of Roland and Oliver. And they're twin orphans that become attached to the train of Charlemagne and become two of Charlemagne's knights. It's the original of the silly buddy movie. It's over the top romance archetype. It's one of the classic romance archetypes, and you follow these two who are the best of friends and are constantly arguing over the pretty girl. Oh my God! I mean, they beat the hell out of each other. And every time there's a great battle, it's Roland and Oliver who are at the front battling these. They're the original for Fafnir and the Grey Mouser. They're the original for every high fantasy pair you want to talk about of the early high fantasies. And the Saracens are invading southern France once again, and there is a pass, and the only person to defend it is Roland and his small band that is wiped out by the Saracens, and it is Roland blowing upon his horn to summon Oliver to his aid. And in his final defeat, he smashes his sword so that the Saracens cannot take it from him. And it's just the epic, archetypal high fantasy from which he drew the death of Boromir. And I read Roland Oliver before I read The Lord of the Rings, and I was like, wow, that's a great death. It's just like Roland's. So, The Lay of Roland and Oliver. Anyway.
Okay, I was also going to say that even at the pulp level, the two different facets we've been discussing are very easily discerned. Take John Carter and take Conan. Neither of them are really written for adults, but Conan fears. John Carter's never been afraid of anything in 300 years. Conan bleeds. I don't think John Carter got nicked in 183 sword fights. All right, Conan doesn't die. We all know he's not going to, but at least his reactions are a little more human, maybe even, given his superstitions, a little more like some of ours might be. Certainly John Carter's aren't.
Well, Burroughs and Howard were two very different people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Howard was ADHD and,
Robert Howard, the writer of Conan, was attention deficit. We now recognize him as being either bipolar or ADHD. He was kind of manic depressive, and he was a weightlifter, a bodybuilder, and a barroom and a brawler. So he wrote what he knew, and he was used to being hit, and he was used to the pain associated with that. Versus Edgar Rice Burroughs was a guy who never left his living room.
Well,
essentially.
Burroughs was an entrepreneur. He viewed himself as a businessman, not a writer. And he died in bed at the age of 75 reading the Sunday comics. Robert E. Howard went out in the desert when his mother died and blew his brains out at the age of 30. I mean, he was a much more prolific author dead than he ever was alive.
Okay, what with the discussion we've had here, we went a little bit over the audience Q&A period. We have about 5 short minutes left, so lay into us. Yes, ma'am.
In particular, I would write about one of the processes for writing scenes, and I wanted to ask, how would you portray a really chaotic battle scene without losing your reader in the chaos at the same time?
You would probably say it was really chaotic and confusing.
I mean, there are ways to do than just saying it. I mean, showing it.
You would do it through the viewpoint of the character that was in the midst of the battle.
Yeah.
And any character who is in the midst of a true battle, the person who's down on the ground, the person at the front line of the battle, will always view the battle as utter chaos, whether the general sees it as chaos or not. Now you can also back up and have the overarching universal looking at it and go, okay, it's just become complete chaos. Jerry Pournelle actually had one particular scene where there were battles going on all over the place, and the character who was not the commander but was the viewpoint on the ground at the command level gets a call from higher, and they say, you know, what's the status? And he goes, bit of a dog's breakfast. And you know, if you think about a dog's breakfast, bunch of stuff all chopped up. That's basically was, you know, he was just, well, it's a bit of a dog's breakfast. And it was because they completely lost control. There was stuff going on everywhere, and it was total chaos.
The only major space battle I've ever done, I did about 3-4 years ago, and I wanted it to be chaotic, and I was trying to think how, for my viewpoint character, who was the captain of a ship or a small fleet, and it occurred to me that if this battle had been going on for any length of time, there are going to be more parts of ships and disabled ships than healthy ones, and they caused more damage floating freely in the middle of a battle than any of the guns did, and that was my way of showing how chaotic it was. I have no idea if that's accurate.
Yeah, no,
I would
it is.
say-
I mean,
You
the
can-
math is there.
And you can throw in elements like friendly fire, friend fighting friend, and this can happen in a sword fight as well as it can happen. I mean, if the chaos recognition that, oh my God, this person I just decapitated is wearing the right uniform.
Yeah. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Well,
So, yeah.
sensory-wise, you know, you'll hear sounds over much greater distances than what you'll see. And so your characters can recognize distant sounds and locations of distant sounds, using all of them. Also, you know, if you've got anything going on the ground, what point of view are you? Like you're saying, do you have an omniscient point of view where you can pull back and take a bird's eye view? If you're stuck in the character, as things go on, lines of sight will open up where they will see beyond their immediate sphere. And so you can see into other pieces about, you can also see reactions of other characters and glean what's going on in other parts of the battle from the characters in those areas reacting.
Have your character be in a loss and have to deal with a rout. A really good example of, you know, in fiction of what you're talking about is in Starship Troopers, the first battle that the main character is involved in. So if you haven't read it, read that. Read how he reacts.
Watch Aliens and start getting overrun.
For one more, go ahead.
So what do you think y'all's opinion is on technical terms, like as far as the importance of technical terms such as in fight scenes where like axe kick was
possible unless you're really playing to the crowd. If you're writing to the group that really likes the martial arts, well, or the gun porn or the whatever, if that's your bailiwick, if that's what your readers want from you, then do the blow by blow. But I think it kind of gets pedantic if you get too much into he did this with this particular move, etc.
Absolutely depends upon your market. It absolutely 100% depends on your market. Everything depends on what market you're writing to. Generally, whatever you enjoy, you better make that your market. Okay, so if you enjoy that, then do it. Okay, and you will either find the market or not. You may cut some out. Here's a trick to it, though. And everybody who's an aspiring author and might be writing in something where there's gun porn, or there's tech porn, or there's porn, martial arts porn, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the trick. You set up a cliffhanger. Classic example of this from one of my books is I had a sniper fire an impossible shot. And you know who the target is, you know who the shooter is, you're involved in the situation. I then did an entire page on the ballistics. And what that actually does, it does two things. One, for the gun porn people, it gives them the gun porn. The other, for the people who are not into gun porn, it draws out the pacing. It's a tense moment. And it draws out the pacing, and then you give them the answer. So if you do want to put some technical stuff in there, put it in some place where the reader is waiting to find something out, and then they become very frustrated with you, but they become frustrated with you in a good way, because this